Hello, and welcome to another Steer Your Career podcast with Kadima Careers. On today's podcast, I'm really excited to have former Googler, or as we call them, Zoogler, Tom Leung. He has a storied product career at Google. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the differences between product manager interviews and other interviews at Google. Tom's interviewed hundreds of people throughout his career. We talk a little inside baseball there. But Google product interviews are some of the hardest interviews to pass. So we talk a lot about that. And we talk also about how Tom changed his interview style midway through his career and what incentivized him to do that, what motivated him to do that. We're going to get into that conversation shortly. But before we do, if you are an ambitious professional, if you have grit, if you are motivated to make a change, if you have a bias to action, and if you're willing to persevere through the trials and tribulations of the job acquisition process, we at Kadima Careers can help you. We offer 3 different programs. We offer a personalized coaching program, we offer group coaching, and we offer digital courses. So depending on your learning style, depending on how much support you want from us, we are here to help you get a better job quickly, confidently, and most importantly, with lots more money. So check us out at kadimacareers.com, Kadima careers.com. Also follow me on LinkedIn. I post daily. And with that, we're going to go into this podcast. But the last 3 words I'll leave you with are own your career. Hello, and welcome to another Steer Your Career podcast. Today, I am very excited to have Tom Leung, a seasoned product management executive with decades of experience leading product development efforts. Tom was most recently at Google, where he was rated in the top 4% of his peer group, leading teams of dozens of PMs as a PM director working on Google AI and YouTube. And we're going to dig into that top 4% because that's something I want to understand how they measured that. He previously worked at Microsoft, a small cap company, and led product at venture-backed companies as well. With a global background, Tom has worked in the US, Singapore, and Europe, and today Tom is based in the heart of Silicon Valley in Palo Alto and studied history and economics at Bowdoin College. He was magna cum laude, and he earned his MBA from Harvard Business School, receiving the Student Association Award for his work as a co-chair of the Career Teams program. And I want to understand what the Careers Teams program is as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Tom. And Tom, what did I miss there in that bio of you?
It was pretty comprehensive. I'll just add a fun fact. I am sitting in my home office surrounded by 3 different aquariums.
Very cool. And what sort of species do you have in those aquarium?
I have one nano reef tank, so it's a saltwater tank with about 10 species of coral and some clownfish and other saltwater fish.
Oh, very cool. Sounds like you have your hands full there. I just have birds and dogs here in the Stein household. So first question, like looking at your bio, where you were rated in the top 4% of your peer group leading teams at some of the best companies in the world. You were at Google, you were at Microsoft, YouTube. What were you measured on to get that top 4%?
Yeah, like Google, like many companies, we have a very structured performance review process, and there's a career profile for every level within product management. I was an L8, and what happens is the performance kind of review process involves people above your level, in my case, senior directors and VPs, assessing my performance and then basically allocating me to a band of performance where it used to be needs improvement, meets expectations, exceeds, strongly exceeds, and then like superb. And now it's transformative, significant impact, some impact, or something like that.
And were you there during the days when we used to give people scores, numerical scores from like 0.0 to
yes,
4.0? Yeah.
yes. When I first joined, we did that. And so, yeah, my last perf review, which they renamed grad at the end of 2022, I was rated transformative, which is only allocated to 4% of the pool.
Wow, pretty impressive. You were Google for 4 years at YouTube, and like Google and YouTube are essentially the same. They're different leadership. On your LinkedIn profile, you say 4 years at YouTube and about 3.5 years at Google. Talk about your Google career.
Yeah, I had three different chapters of Google. So from '06 to '09, I was in what used to be called AdWords, the ad platform, and Google Analytics. And then I left Google for 7 years, mostly in startups, and then came back in 16 and was a PM director at YouTube. And then 3 years in Google Research. And they were all so different. They couldn't be more different because the AdWords stuff was when we were like 30,000 employees. And at that time, that was, now I look back and I was like, wow, that's really small. But I thought, wow, Google's already pretty big. Who wouldn't think that we'd become hundreds of thousands? But that was just early Google. It was so crazy. I still remember there was no headcount limitation. It was just who you could get through hiring committee. And if
Yep.
you get people through hiring committee, like could get them into the company. And then the YouTube stuff was super cool because that was in Zurich. So I was an expat leading up and building out a team in our Zurich engineering office. So that was like an international experience. But YouTube was run as a separate division and we had amazing leadership there. I still do to this day. And then research was in Palo Alto, and that was completely different because this was like a moonshot 0 to 1 thing, applying AI to healthcare. So they're all very different.
So, in your second stint at Google, you came in as director and you left
hmm
Google as director. Did you get promoted at all during those 8 years?
Yeah. So in '06, I was like maybe. And then when I left, I was a 6 or a 7, maybe a 6. And then when I came back, I was hired in as an 8 as a PM director. And after that transformative rating, so then I had mostly been getting strongly exceeds and had gone up for promo a couple times about 3 or 4 years after I had been a director. It didn't make L9. And then I thought, okay, at the end of 22, I got transformative, which I had never gotten the top rating before. I've been getting strongly exceeds pretty much per period. And then I was like, oh, this will be a good time. Then 2023 happened. Not only did I have to let go of a lot of people, by the end of the year, my role went away as well. So promo budgets are very tight right now, as I understand, even talking to folks that are still at Google. It's not the time to move up the ladder. I think people are happy to just be there.
Yeah. How did you were a top performer, transformative top 4 percentile of the company, and you
Yeah.
got laid off. So, if
Mm.
anything, this is a testament that people that have been impacted by RIFs, reduction in forces, should not take that as a personal affront to them or their ability, and also realize that most companies don't see it as that either. But would you agree with that?
Oh
Anything to
yeah.
add there?
Yeah, I think in the '80s and '90s, like layoffs often were associated, or I assumed they were associated with, oh, you're like reducing your poorest performers. And as someone who was involved in Jan 2023, which was when we did the big round of layoffs, I can tell you we let go of some top performers. So much so that I was like, what? This person?
Yeah.
And the way it worked was we were not eliminating people, we were eliminating entire teams. And you couldn't say, oh, this team of 7, we're going to keep these 2. You had to just knock off the whole team. And then when my role got eliminated, they basically said, we're going to restructure, like this whole group is not going to be its own thing anymore. And in which case, like we had multiple directors and there's some VPs that were affected as well. So, yeah, people should not take it personally. It's more the way that the companies are reducing their headcount. If you think about the alternative, if they said, oh, listen, we're going to remove the bottom 20% or bottom 10% from all teams, it would be extremely disruptive and maybe even litigious. So it's easier to say this whole group is gone. You're all going to get great severance packages. So there's a soft landing. And for me, it worked out because Around Christmas of 22, I was like, man, I'm over 10 years now at Google. And I might make L9, but I don't see a path to VP unless like I hit a home, like a grand slam. And that's not entirely in your control. Like at that point, like you've got to create whatever, YouTube TV, like a whole new business.
Yeah, you got to be in the
And
right place too.
yeah, and the right time. And so I was like, I think I want to change things up and pursue other things as well. So I was like, okay, maybe sometime in 23, I'll do that. And it worked out because at that point, then there was talk like, hey, even your role might go away. And I was like, oh, I understand. I can make that work. I appreciate the company's support. So yeah, it was good. And at the time,
Cool.
it wasn't good because I didn't pick the date. So I didn't feel like I was in full control like I normally might. So that kind of sucked. And there was like a few days where I was like really bummed, just out of pride. But I'm feeling pretty good now.
You look pretty happy. You were in product management at Google. You boomerang back. You started as I think a 4 or 5, you said? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they hired me as a 4 and then luckily moved me up pretty quickly. They recalibrated me. I guess hiring committee was being conservative as they were at that time. But yeah, that's how I started.
So you got into Google twice, once as a 4, and then you came back as a director. So you know how to pass Google interviews. How many people would you guess that
Oh,
you've
God.
interviewed during your Google career?
Probably, I might have done like 2 to 3 interviews a week, typically 150-ish a year. Like we're at hundreds, several hundreds easily.
Okay, so you're a seasoned interviewer, and Google interviews. I want to dig into the product management interview, but Google
Hmm.
interviews generally focus on 4 key areas: role related knowledge, GCA, general cognitive ability, leadership, and Googliness. Is
Hmm.
there something different on the product related interviews than those 4 dimensions?
For product interviews, there was like a technical one, there was like an analytical one, there was like a product strategy one, then there was like a leadership kind of collaboration, yada yada one. Those are generally the themes. I would focus on the product strategy and product thinking kind of stuff. Those were
Yeah.
the ones they had asked me to do usually.
And with the product interviews, would they generally have 4 interviewers? So it would go a recruiter, a hiring manager, and then to the loops or the on-site?
It varied, but from the last set of hires that I made in 22, the process we used was the recruiter would interview a bunch of people and they would say, hey, Tom, I think I found this person. And then I would say, okay, let me chat with them very briefly first, because as a hiring manager, I wanted to just get a good read initially. I didn't want to use the whole panel. And then we would usually have, if I thought, okay, yeah, I think this person could be a good candidate, let's run them through the panel. Then the panel for my hires would be like maybe 4 people. And then I would sometimes want to interview them again more in depth. And then usually we would make a decision. Now, I would say that what I just described to you is often for people who already went through hiring committee. So they actually went through the official Google hiring process. Then what I did was at a lot of the matchmaking, like the after the hiring committee, are they the right person for my team? If they were brand new, sometimes we would collapse them and do them combined. But
So
a lot of times I would,
after the hiring committee, then they went through another 4 or 5 interviews. Okay.
yeah.
Was
And
that
you know,
unique to your team, or is that like how
uh,
usually product does it?
I think there are some teams that are like, oh, if they're through hiring committee, the hiring manager will just have a get to know you and we're good to go. But for me, when I was hiring, because I was hiring directors as well, my
Right.
team. So my view was like, I love hiring committee. And like our org has specific needs and I want to get like extra confidence. I will also say that even when I was hiring for IC roles, that going through a hiring committee meant that they met a general Google standard. But I learned that it's really important to make sure they're a good fit for the team. And that's different than early Google. Early Google was you hire athletes and you can drop them into any area and they'll make it happen. And I don't think that's true as Google has gotten so broad. Like, you can't take a Waymo person and drop them into YouTube and assume they're going to be awesome. Like, they might, but it's not for sure. And the same way, you can't take somebody working on TensorFlow chips and drop them into like search team. Like, there's some overlap there, but it's different. Whereas early Google, like, we just had really search, Gmail, and AdWords for the most part.
It was all
Uh,
software, at least.
yeah. So for my team at Google Health, we had a little bit longer of a process, but even just to get the general PM role, you'd still have to do those kind of four kind of areas of competency. And my role for those hires was I would just be interviewing general PMs and giving my feedback. And I wouldn't be in hiring committee at that level. I would just give my report and move on with my day. So I played two roles. There were sometimes I was a hiring manager and I see all the reviews. And then sometimes I'm just trying to contribute to the PM community and do my round of interviews and play my part.
Yeah, interesting because I interviewed back in 2015. I interviewed more people than anyone at Google, except for one of the security guards that was like hiring like the blue shirts. I interviewed 225 people that year because I was growing my team a lot, and I probably interviewed
Yeah.
about 400 or 500 people during my time at Google. And I was in sales. I was in GTech. I was rolled up
Hmm.
to like most on the sales side. The interview process is a little bit more streamlined of recruiter, hiring manager, like you said, then the loops or the on-sites. But we didn't have the pre-hiring committee to make them Google worthy. It was just like hiring them
Hmm.
right for our team. So it's got to be really painful for the candidate to go through basically like 8 interviews
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt bad doing it, but I would always remind people, look, this is going to protect you because you don't want to join a team that you're not a good fit for. And that would be uncomfortable for you. It's not in your interest. And especially if they had gone through general hiring committee, then they could just wait for the right match. I had interviewed people who had been pre-approved by hiring committee for multiple quarters, just waiting for the right match. And even now, when I look back on jobs that I hadn't been offered, I initially get angry. What the hell? I could have been very good for them. And then now I'm of the mind, you know what, man? If they didn't see it and they didn't want to make the offer, like, they might have done you a favor because they know more about what they need than you do. That's all good.
Yeah. So, what were some of your go to interview questions that you would ask candidates?
So when I was earlier in my career, even before Google and in consulting, but even a little bit when I was at Google, I fell into this trap of trying to, one, in all honesty, show people how smart I was, and two, try and see how literally like IQ smart they were. And then over the years, I realized like this is not useful because I'm not trying to hire someone to take an IQ test. I need people who can solve problems, work on teams, follow through, be coachable, be curious. Then I shifted and I took an approach of I am going to just ask them questions that I'm literally dealing with right now at work with some obfuscated facts for confidentiality. But I would say, like, we're trying to debate whether we should do feature A or B for next quarter for this product.
Mhm.
Here's a little bit about each. Like, how would you think about this? And I found like that was much more useful because I actually had an experience where a Google PM had gone through hiring committee with flying colors. And I was like, oh my God, please join my team. And then it didn't work out. And it was pretty clear to everyone that it was not working very soon. And I did a little retrospective. I was like, how did this happen? And I realized, oh, number one, like, I didn't do any vetting after I was introduced because in my mind, you've been approved. So it's just like figuring out, can we have a conversation? And I think the types of questions that maybe they were asked in the hiring process did not really reflect the actual work that we needed this person to do. So that was like a huge thing for me, which is, okay, what do I need people to do? I need people that I can disagree with and that we can be constructive and logical, that we can solve problems together. I need people that can help me understand a complex topic and they can summarize it and synthesize it in a really concise way. I need people who can be creative, yes, and I need people who can work on teams and build consensus. So then my interview style shifted to simulate more the types of things I needed. And then the last version, this my current approach, is to then take that and then go out of my way to help them show me the best version of themselves. Like, I am not here, like old Tom was like, I'm going to show you how not smart you are, which is so
Yeah.
dumb. Such a small minded way of going about life, really. But now I'm like, okay, I want to see the best version of Alan. So let me figure out how I can find what you're amazing at and get a taste of that. And then if I have areas that I have concerns about, like, I don't know if he's that analytical or that technical or can he work with other people, I'm going to go out of my way to disprove that by giving you multiple chances to show me that my hunch was wrong. I feel better about like my decisions using that approach.
What changed between old Tom and new Tom where you were like trying to be like a know-it-all versus trying to like, and I've
Yeah.
been drawn into that also myself, and it's
Yeah.
a very similar
Yeah.
perspective versus trying to find someone that's complementary, effective, net positive for the team, and they don't have to compete with you necessarily on intellect.
Yeah. Part of it was, I think I assumed this is what I'm supposed to do because out of college interviewed for consulting and banking roles and they were just brutal, like just trying to whatever. I initially thought this is what we're supposed to do. It's hazing, maybe almost. This is
Yeah.
how we've always done it. But I think the thing that changed for me was maybe seeing the poor accuracy rate for there wasn't a strong correlation between interview scores and perf scores. And I just noticed that over time. I'm like, there are people who are killing it in the interview loop and they're not killing it when they get here. So I'm not going to do it the same way. And even my scores weren't mapping up. And it still happens. Like you interview someone and they're amazing and then they show up on the team and they're not. The inflection point was when you're accountable for probably when I became a people manager. And then I was like, shit, if I make the wrong call here, like affects me and the whole team. Whereas like when I was just being assigned interviews and I don't even know where these people are going to end up, I'll just do what I know.
Yeah. What is unique about product manager interviews than others to the extent that you know, because you've only been in the product management space
Yeah.
at Google? Because my understanding is that, again, the GCA, the RRK, the Googliness, the leadership.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I like what you're talking about in terms of inquiring about like real problems that you have on your
Yeah.
plate. Like I used to do that. I used to focus on GCA at Google. So I would always have like
Mm-hmm.
one or two go-to questions, but then I would always have a real life issue that me or
Mm-hmm.
my team were dealing with and asking them how they thought through it because there was no answer to it because otherwise I would have solved
Yeah.
it. I'm just
Yeah.
curious to hear how they're thinking through it. But maybe you don't have the answer here of what's the difference because you haven't seen the other side. Like I haven't seen your side.
They don't sound that different, to be honest, Alan. I
Yeah.
think maybe the biggest one would be the product focused interview where we talk about how would you design a product to do this, or tell me about a product that you love, or tell me about a product that you've improved. And then you use that as an invitation to go deeper, like, oh, why did you think that? Or what other alternatives did you consider? And how did you make that decision? And how did it work out? And even now, like people become so coached and prepped for those things that signal is a little bit noisy too. There are some people who you just feel like you're getting walked through a framework very clearly,
Yeah.
and I don't blame them. They're playing the game, but I don't think the interview is that different. I think overall, like leadership and cognitive abilities and technical skills, analytical skills, those are all the same. Googliness.
Yeah. Googliness was always the most frustrating for me because I think that leads to lack of diversity because you're just trying to hire
Mm.
someone that you would hang out with or that you're comfortable with. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the googliness attribute.
Yeah, well, they tried to make it more. So I agree with you. Early Googles, I think a lot of us internalize it as they seem like they would get along here and they feel like the other people I work with. But I also think there was like a general belief like Googlers We're generally pretty nice and humble and just positive people, which I think is true. But then later they tried to define it. And so there's like an official description of it. I think it has a lot to do with like ability to collaborate, build consensus, work across different teams, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's still a fuzzy one. They're all fuzzy.
So you were there, overlap with me. So you were there 2020 to 2023. Well, you first started. What were the years you were there before you
Oh
boomeranged?
six to oh nine, oh six to
Okay.
oh nine, and then
06 to
16
09.
to 23.
Okay. Okay. So we actually did not overlap because I was there 11 to 16. We did not
Ah,
overlap
just
there.
missed you.
But I was there during some times, and you were there during some times with diversity, equity, and inclusion becoming the forefront
Mhm.
of the conversation. In 2013, Trayvon Martin was murdered. I was at Google then, and there was a
Mhm.
lot of talk and discussion about that and things that they were going to do. 2020, George Floyd was murdered. I wasn't at Google then, I was at Salesforce, but I'm assuming it was a fairly similar sort of, and it was also the
Mhm.
pandemic there and so forth.
Mhm.
Diversity tech is not where it should be. Do you agree that it's not where it should be? And if so, I'd love your perspective as a hiring manager and someone building a team, why you think it's the case. Because I have some hypothesis, and I would love your perspective as someone who has built lots of teams.
It's not where it should be. I think it reflects society to the extent that there are definitely groups that disproportionately get access to opportunity early and education early. And that just sets them up to be competitive in these kinds of roles. And what we've tried to do is go out of our way to expand the applicant pool as much as possible. And so, as an example, when I was at early Google, like we really only hired, I don't know what the hiring process was. Everybody I work with seemed to go to the same schools. It was like 5 or 10 of them.
Stanford,
And
Harvard. Yeah.
yeah, throw in some MIT people, and that
Yeah.
was pretty much
Yeah.
it. So it was pretty small pool. And then I think they did a study and they looked at a variety of factors. Like when I applied in '06, I had to give my SATs. I had an MBA already. I was like, you want my SATs from high school?
I had to give my
And
GP in
so,
2011. They just went to GPA, but they wanted my GPA to 2 digits or further because I didn't know what
yeah.
it was. Like I had to get my transcript from college, but they didn't ask SAT then.
Seriously. Yeah. So I was like, what are you going to ask for next? Like my PSAT? This is crazy.
Yeah.
But they looked at all these things, and I think they found that none of these signals were that predictive of actual performance, including like pedigree of school. I think a realization that, guys, like this is not useful, even though we thought they would be very good patterns to repeat. And then the second thing was the company just got so big, like there's not enough of those people either. So you have to grow, you have to look broader. And the good news is you realize that, oh, some of the best performers on my team did not go to those fancy places. And some of the people who had the least success did go to some of the fancy places. It wasn't like perfectly inverse, but it was random. So I think on the DEI stuff, I think every company is trying. What do you do if a group is getting the short end of the stick since pre-K? Are we supposed to make it up,
Since a hospital,
when they're
honestly.
25 years old? Yeah. So we still have to get the work done. So I think for me, the DEI stuff needs to happen much earlier in life. Trying to fix it even at the college levels, it can't hurt, but I don't think it's as useful. I'm a big kind of early education person.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the efforts that you alluded to, the companies, if they want to try to not resolve it, but address it at age 25, 30, 35, they need to be more proactive to reach out to those. But it's easy sometimes to just get referrals and other talent that comes in to the pipeline. And
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah. And on that note, so if your interviews have changed over time and it's not always the best way of assessing talent, and schools aren't the best way of assessing talent, interviews in general are not necessarily the
Yeah.
best way of assessing talent, even if you have 8 rounds of them, what is the best way to assess talent? Or is it basically you just roll the dice and you try to get the odds the best in your favor, but you're going to have a lot of mistakes?
What I do now, so I'm actually doing some early idea kind of incubation for a potential startup later this year. And I wanted to get some help from some early career or aspiring PMs to help me with like customer research and market research. I put out a call for people to help me actually for an unpaid internship and on LinkedIn. And I got 400 applicants in a day. And I was like, oh my God, like, how am I going to sort through this? Because I know I'm not just going to look at the schools because I've learned that's not that useful. And what I did was I looked at a combination of what education they had, but also I asked them some basic questions. And then after that, my main vetting process was to ask them to do like a homework assignment. And that's where you did start to see differences. And so I used that to then determine who I would interview. And so it was a combination of the interview, like how were they communicating, thinking, how could we get along? And then looking at the homework, like how thorough was this work and how insightful was it? And even then, it's not perfect, but I think it's better than just the performative process of the job interview.
So you had people apply for a free internship, then you assign them homework to do, unpaid
Yeah.
homework. And of those 400 people that applied, how many people chose to do the homework?
I was surprised. I didn't invite all 400 to do the homework. So I invited maybe 40 to do the homework. And I was hoping only 10 would do it. And then like about 30 did the damn homework. And I was like, oh man, now I got to go read all the homework. But it was a surprising amount. It might be a 2024 thing. The economy is so tough for PMs now that people are willing to do that. I don't think they would have said, I wouldn't have been able to do that in 2021. Nobody, people would be
Right.
like, what? An unpaid internship? You want me to do homework? No.
It's interesting to see the different dynamics of the job market and how willing people are to do some things. Awesome, Tom. We're running low on time, so I want to make sure I get to our last two questions that I
Hmm.
ask everybody. What's one last piece of sick career advice you'd like to leave our listeners with?
It's actually advice I got from my first manager out of undergrad. And he didn't give it as, I don't think he was even giving it as career advice. It was just like decision making advice. And he would always say, Tom, you got to minimize maximum regret. And I've applied that to my career, which is when I was in late 22 and I was like, oh, I think I might need to leave Google and do something else. I was like, on the one hand, like Google's been really good to me and it's a great place to work and I'm well compensated. And on the other hand, I was like, 10 years from now, am I going to look back and say, why did you spend 20 years at Google? Because it would be 20 years, 10 years from now, and not do something else. Like you didn't have to stay there. Like you were in a position, you had the privilege to do other things. So I'm a big minimize maximum regret kind of guy.
Okay, cool. That's deep and a little paradoxical, but interesting. Last question. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your insights, experience, and also if you want to share what you're working on now?
Yeah. So the one central place is probably LinkedIn. They can follow me. My alias is Tom L, but just search for Tom Leung. I have a lot going on. I do career coaching and PM coaching. I teach classes on Maven. I have a Substack. I have a podcast where I
Okay.
interview thoughtful people like yourself and a lot of product leaders. And then I do some angel investing too. So if there's any founders out there that are pre-seed, they could get in touch with me as well.
Awesome, Tom. I learned a lot about the differences of the Google Product Manager interview. And it's interesting between the two of us, we were probably at Google for 20 years, but just never at the same exact time.
It's an amazing place and we learned so much and what great luck we had to be there.
Yeah, very fortunate. Thanks a lot, Tom.
Thank you, Alan.